The rain had been falling for 6 hours, a steady, percussive drumming against the panoramic windows of the Northwood Regional Hospital's ICU. It was 2:17 a.m. From his station behind the gleaming counter, Ilara Vance watched the water bead and race down the glass, distorting the distant city lights into shivering constellations. The sound was a constant, a white noise that usually soothed the jagged edges of the night shift. But not this night. This night, the rhythm felt like a countdown. She pushed her gray utility cart, the rubber wheels whispering over the polished linoleum. The cart was her island of order in a sea of controlled chaos. Neatly folded rags, spray bottles filled with solutions whose chemical scents she knew like a vintner knows grapes, and a small, worn copy of a poetry anthology tucked into a side pocket, a secret indulgence. Ilara, as she was known here, was 48 years old, though the perpetual fatigue of night shifts and the quiet weight she carried made her seem older. Her dark hair, pulled back in a severe functional bun, was threaded with silver that caught the cold fluorescent light. The lines around her eyes were not from laughter, but from years of intense focus and a grief that had settled deep into her bones. Her uniform was a shapeless gray tunic and matching trousers, the color of anonymity. But it was her hands that were the tell, the one part of her that betrayed the disguise. They were long-fingered and elegant, the nails kept short and clean. Even gripping the handle of a mop, they did not look like a janitor's hands. They looked like a surgeon's, which, of course, they had been. For 22 years, they had been the hands of Dr. Aris Thorne, a name once whispered with reverence in the halls of Johns Hopkins, a name she had buried 4 years ago, along with her husband. She stopped her cart outside ICU Bay 4. Inside, a team was working on a young woman, 19 years old, according to the hurried whispers Ilara had overheard, a college student named Chloe. She'd come into the ER 12 hours earlier with a fever, a cough, and profound fatigue. Flu, they'd said, then pneumonia. Now she was here, intubated, her vitals scrolling across the monitor in a frantic, luminous script. Ilara's eyes, trained by decades of practice, bypassed the clutter of the room and went straight to that monitor. Heart rate 140, blood pressure 80/45 and falling. O2 saturation dipping into the high 80s despite the ventilator. They were losing her. A young, cocky-looking attending was leading the team. He had the sharp, exhausted energy of a man running on caffeine and ambition. Dr. Ben Carter. Ilara knew the name. She didn't know him, not personally, but she recognized the type. She had trained dozens of them, brash, brilliant, and utterly convinced of the infallibility of their own algorithms of logic. He was barking orders, calling for another vasopressor, demanding a portable chest X-ray. All standard moves, all wrong. Ilara's gaze drifted from the monitor to the patient herself. Beneath the tangle of wires and tubes, Chloe's skin had a faint, almost imperceptible mottling, a dusky, lace-like pattern spreading across her limbs. Livedo reticularis, and her nail beds. Even from the doorway, Ilara could see the telltale blue tinge of peripheral cyanosis. Her breath caught in her throat, a tiny, involuntary hitch. Her right hand, the one that had betrayed her, gave a faint, phantom twitch inside her pocket. The tremor was mostly gone now, a ghost that only visited in moments of extreme stress or memory. It was visiting now. She saw the mottling, she saw the crashing pressure, she saw the respiratory failure, and her mind, the one part of her that had never faltered, assembled the pieces with terrifying speed. It wasn't the flu, it wasn't pneumonia. It was catastrophic antiphospholipid syndrome, a CAPS event, a 1 in a million cytokine storm where the body's immune system declared total war on its own blood vessels. She had seen it twice before in her career, Both patients had died on the table. But she had learned from them. She knew the one, desperate, counterintuitive thing that might save this girl. A thing they would never think to do. She stayed in the shadows of the corridor, a ghost in gray, her knuckles white on the handle of her cart. To speak up was to shatter the quiet, anonymous life she had so carefully constructed. It was to invite the questions, the scrutiny, the past she had run from. It was to become Dr. Eris Thorne again, a person she no longer knew how to be. Her pocket buzzed. She pulled out the cheap burner phone she used. A text from Mrs. Gable, the kindly, retired nurse who lived next door and watched her daughter. Maya had the dream again. "She's okay. Asked for you. I gave her warm milk and she's back asleep." Ilara's whole body went cold, a different kind of chill from the one the ICU inspired. The dream. The one where Maya was in a vast, empty house, calling for her, and Ilara wouldn't answer. A simple, childish fear that was, for Ilara, a damningly accurate metaphor for her life. She typed back a reply, her fingers stiff. "Thank you, Helen. I'll be home before she wakes. I promise. I promise." The words hung in the sterile air. She made that promise to Maya every night. A promise to be there, to be steady, to be predictable. A promise that was the entire foundation of this new, small life. Speaking up now would risk that. It would mean chaos. It would mean the world rushing back in. But as she looked through the glass at the dying girl, at the frantic, failing efforts of the doctors, another promise echoed in her mind. A different one, sworn 26 years ago under the weight of a white coat. First, do no harm. Hiding what she knew was a form of harm. It was a sin of omission. She took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of antiseptic filling her lungs. The cart's wheels gave a soft squeak as she turned it and pushed it silently away from the unfolding tragedy, her mind a raging battleground. For 4 years, she had chosen her daughter over her calling. Tonight, she was realizing with dawning horror, they might be the same thing. If you believe that people deserve to be seen for who they truly are, not just what their job title says, subscribe now and share this story. Now, back to what happens next. She retreated to the custodial closet on the 3rd floor, a small, windowless room that smelled of bleach and damp mops. It was her sanctuary, the one place where no one looked for her, where she could be invisible. She sank onto an overturned bucket, her head in her hands. The rhythmic hum of the floor polisher in the corner was usually a comfort, but now it sounded like the thrumming of her own frayed nerves. The image of Chloe's mottled skin was burned into her retina. The flashing red numbers of the vital signs monitor were a frantic pulse behind her eyes. Her mind, unbidden, slipped its leash. It slid back 4 years, 8 months, and 12 days. To another hospital room, one with a view of the Baltimore harbor. The light had been different then, a warm afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Liam had been in the bed, his skin not mottled but pale, translucent. He was a musician, a cellist, his hands large and calloused in a way that was so different from her own. Hands that could draw sounds from wood and string that felt like the voice of God. He had been fine a week before. Aches, a fever. "Just a bug," he'd said, smiling, his voice already raspy. Eris, then Dr. Thorne, chief of cardiothoracic surgery, had been in the middle of a grueling 12-hour aortic arch replacement. The Thorne procedure, they were already calling it, her signature achievement. She'd finished, stripped off her gloves, and found 17 missed calls from him. When she finally got to his bedside, the diagnosis was already on the chart, a brutal, alien phrase: fulminant viral cardiomyopathy. A virus, so common and benign in most, had found a perfect, horrifying home in the muscle of his heart. It was destroying it from the inside out, turning the most vital, powerful pump into a weak, boggy mess. She remembered standing there in her scrubs, the faint, metallic scent of blood still on her, looking at the man she loved more than her own life, and feeling a terrifying, profound helplessness. She was one of the world's foremost experts on the human heart. She could hold one in her hands, stop it, repair its delicate architecture, and coax it back to life. But she couldn't stop this. She couldn't cut out a virus. All her knowledge, all her skill, all the accolades and publications, they were useless. She could only watch as the monitors tracked his heart's inexorable failure. She argued with the cardiology team, pulling up obscure studies on her phone, suggesting desperate, experimental treatments. They listened, of course. She was Dr. Thorne. But they looked at her with pity. They knew what she knew. It was too fast, too aggressive. The last day, his ejection fraction was less than 10%. He was too weak for a transplant, too sick for a VAD. He was conscious, intermittently. He saw the look on her face. "It's not your fault, Ari," he'd whispered, his breath catching. "You can't fix everything." He'd looked over at a picture of their 5-year-old daughter, Maya, on the bedside table. "Just promise me, Maya, you'll be there for her. Really there, not just in between surgeries." He died at 3:42 p.m., the long, continuous tone of the flatline monitor, a sound that severed her life in two, the before and the after. In the weeks that followed, the grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. She tried to go back to work. She stood in the OR, scrubbed in, a scalpel in her hand. She looked down at the exposed, beating heart of a patient, and her hand, her dominant right hand, began to shake. A fine, uncontrollable tremor. It wasn't neurological, the specialist said. It was psychosomatic, a physical manifestation of a psychic wound. Grief, trauma, guilt. Her career was over. The hands that had defined her had betrayed her. She had stared at her reflection in the dark window of her office one night, the wall of plaques and awards behind her like a monument to a dead woman. Liam's last words echoed in her ears. Really there. She hadn't been. Her life had been a series of trade-offs, a missed school play for an emergency surgery, a bedtime story read over the phone from a conference in Vienna. She had told herself it was for the greater good, but now the greater good felt like an abstraction, and the reality was a 5-year-old girl who had lost her father and had a mother who was a ghost. So she had made a choice. She sold the house. She put her entire professional life into storage. She took Maya, moved 600 miles away to a quiet, unremarkable city where no one knew the name Aris Thorne. She became Elara Vance, a widow starting over. She got the job at the hospital because the night shift meant she could be there to take Maya to school in the morning and be there when she got home. The anonymity was a balm. No one expected anything of her. She was just the cleaning lady. Her world shrank to the size of her small apartment, Maya's school, and the quiet, sterile corridors of Northwood Regional. And for 4 years, it had been enough. It had been safe. A harsh buzz from the walkie-talkie on her hip jolted her back to the present. It was her supervisor, a gruff man named Sal. "Vance, Code Blue, ICU 4. Repeat, Code Blue, ICU 4. Stay clear of the area." Code Blue. Cardiac arrest. They were losing her. The countdown had ended. Elara stood up, the overturned bucket clattering to the floor. The tremor in her hand was gone, replaced by an unnerving, absolute stillness. Liam's voice. "You can't fix everything." But maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. Maybe she couldn't fix her own broken heart, but she could still fix this. She could keep a different kind of promise. The promise she had made to a profession she had abandoned, but that had never truly abandoned her. She pushed the door of the closet open and walked out into the hallway, her steps not shuffling or hesitant, but long and purposeful. She was no longer a ghost, she was a doctor, and she was going to save that girl's life, or she was going to expose herself for the fraud she felt she had become. Either way, the hiding was over. She walked toward Bay 4, her heart pounding a rhythm that was equal parts terror and a long-forgotten sense of purpose. The scene in Bay 4 was controlled pandemonium. A nurse was doing chest compressions, her face grim, counting out loud. Another was pushing drugs from the crash cart. "Epi is in!" An orderly was bagging the patient, forcing air into lungs that wouldn't cooperate. And in the middle of it all was Dr. Ben Carter, his face pale and slick with sweat, his earlier confidence shattered. He was staring at the flat line on the monitor as if he could will it to change through sheer force of will. "Come on, Chloe, come on," he muttered, more a prayer than a command. "Give me a rhythm." Ilara stopped just inside the doorway, her presence going completely unnoticed in the storm of activity. Her eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail. The overflowing sharps container, the discarded packaging from the IV lines, the D-dimer results on the screen, astronomically high, the faint, sweet smell of metabolic acidosis hanging in the air. Everything confirmed her diagnosis. They were treating a cardiac arrest, but this wasn't a primary cardiac event. It was the end result of a systemic vascular collapse. Pushing epinephrine was like throwing gasoline on a fire. She had to speak. Now. She took a step forward. "Dr. Carter." Her voice was quiet, calm, but it cut through the noise with the precision of a scalpel. Ben Carter didn't even turn around. "Not now! Get out of here! We've got a code!" A nurse glanced at her, her expression a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This is a sterile area." Ilara held her ground. Her gaze was locked on Carter. "You're treating the arrhythmia, but it's a symptom, not the cause. The epi is worsening the thrombosis." Carter finally spun around, his eyes blazing with stress and disbelief. He saw the gray uniform, the name tag that said Ilara, Environmental Services, and his face curdled into a mask of pure condescension. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, his voice dripping with scorn. "I have a 19-year-old girl dying on my table, and the cleaning lady is giving me medical advice. Get out." He turned back to the patient. "Let's push another round of epi and charge the paddles to 200. This was the moment, the precipice. 4 years of silence, of hiding, of being invisible. It all came down to this. She could retreat, let them kill this girl, and keep her fragile peace. Or she could detonate her life. "No," Ilara said. Her voice was still quiet, but now it held a core of tempered steel. The nurse doing compressions faltered for a second, looking back and forth between the doctor and the janitor. Carter's head whipped back around. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no," Ilara repeated, taking another step into the room. She was inside the circle now. She could feel the heat from the defibrillator, see the sheen of sweat on the nurse's brow. "You're fighting the wrong battle. This is a catastrophic antiphospholipid storm, a CAPS event. Her entire vascular system is clotting. The epinephrine is accelerating the microthrombi. You're not just failing to save her, you're actively killing her." A stunned silence fell over the room. The nurse stopped compressions. The only sounds were the beep of the ventilator and the flat, damning tone of the ECG. Carter stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. The words she had used, microthrombi, antiphospholipid, CAPS, were not words a janitor should know. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. Ilara ignored the question. Her focus was absolute. "You need to stop the epi. You need to start a massive bolus of heparin, push high-dose steroids, and begin plasmapheresis. Immediately. You have maybe 3 minutes before the thrombotic cascade causes irreversible brain damage." Carter just shook his head, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "Plasmapheresis? For a code? That's insane. I'm not taking orders from you." He gestured dismissively at her uniform. "Even the cleaning lady knows more than you, huh?" he said to one of the nurses, a cruel joke born of panic. "Charge to 200." The nurse looked at him, then at Ilara's face, at the absolute, unwavering certainty in her eyes. The nurse hesitated. That hesitation was all Ilara needed. She looked directly at Ben Carter, and for the first time, she let the mask slip. She let him see the person underneath, the authority, the knowledge, the weight of 22 years of command. "6 years ago," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal, "you were a third-year resident at Johns Hopkins. You were on my service. We had a patient, a 54-year-old man, post-op from a mitral valve replacement, who threw a clot to his spleen. You wanted to start him on standard anticoagulation. I stopped you. I told you to look at his platelet count. It was dropping. I told you it was heparin-induced thrombocytopenia and that the standard treatment would kill him. You argued with me for 10 minutes until the lab results came back and proved me right. Do you remember that, Dr. Carter?" Ben's face went white. His mind was clearly racing, trying to place her. The gray uniform, the tired face. It didn't compute, but the voice, the cadence, the quiet authority, and the memory, so specific, so accurate. He remembered that day. He remembered the terrifying, brilliant chief of surgery who had saved his career and his patient with a single, counterintuitive insight. He looked at her eyes, really looked at them, past the tired lines, and saw it. The recognition dawned, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock that was so profound it was almost comical. "Dr. Thorne?" he whispered, the name a ghost on his lips. The flatline alarm continued its shrill, incessant scream. "There's no time for this, Ben," Eris said, her voice sharp, back to being a commander. "Are you going to give the order, or are you going to let this girl die so you can protect your ego?" Ben stared at her, then at the patient, then back at her. The entire structure of his reality had just been demolished. The cleaning lady was Dr. Eris Thorne, the legendary Eris Thorne, a woman he had revered, a ghost from his past, was standing in front of him in a janitor's uniform, telling him he was killing his patient. "Heparin," he croaked, his voice cracking. "Get me a 5,000-unit bolus of heparin, and call the blood bank. Tell them we need emergency plasmapheresis in the ICU, stat, and get me 1,000 milligrams of solumedrol." The team, jolted from their stupor, flew into action. A nurse ripped open a heparin vial. Another got on the phone. The nurse who had been doing compressions looked at Eris, her eyes wide with a question. "Continue compressions," Eris commanded, her voice filling the void left by Carter's shock. "But slow down. We need perfusion, not trauma." "You." She pointed to the resident holding the defibrillator paddles. "Put those down. Her heart will have a rhythm once the heparin starts to break down the clots in her coronary arteries. We just need to buy it time." She moved to the head of the bed, her movements economical and precise. She checked the girl's pupils, fixed and dilated. Not good. She tilted her head, checking the carotid pulse herself. Nothing. But her trained fingers, resting on the girl's neck, felt a faint, thready flutter just as the nurse pushed the heparin. A ghost of a pulse. "There," she said softly. "It's working. Keep going." For 2 minutes that stretched into an eternity, The room was a blur of focused action, all of it revolving around the quiet woman in the gray uniform. Ben Carter stood by the monitor, watching, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning awe. The flat line on the ECG wavered. A single, erratic beat appeared. Then another. Then a slow, ugly rhythm. Ventricular escape. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't a flat line. "We have a rhythm," the nurse said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's not perfusing yet," Aris said, her eyes locked on the monitor. "Keep bagging her. We need to oxygenate the tissue that's been starving." The blood pressure cuff automatically cycled. 85/50. Then 90/55. A weak pulse became palpable at the carotid. Chloe's skin, still dusky, seemed to lose some of its horrifying mottled pattern. It was a subtle shift, one that only a trained eye would see. Aris saw it. "She's turning around," Aris breathed. She looked up and met Ben Carter's eyes across the bed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, humbling respect. He just nodded, speechless. The door to the bay swung open, and a man in a suit, Dr. Albright, the chief of medicine, walked in, his face grim. "What the hell is going on here? I was told there was a code, and I walk into—" He stopped, taking in the scene. The patient, miraculously alive. The ER attending, looking like he'd seen a ghost. And in the middle of it all, one of the hospital's janitors, directing care. "Someone want to tell me what's happening?" Albright demanded. Ben Carter found his voice. It was shaky, but clear. "She saved her," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Aris. The janitor. "She saved her life." Stories like this remind us that expertise can hide anywhere, and dismissing someone based on their position might mean missing the person who could save everything. If that resonates, hit like and comment where you're watching from. Because what Aris does next changes everything. The aftermath was a strange, suspended silence. The immediate crisis had passed. Chloe's vitals were stabilizing. The plasmapheresis team was on its way, and the frantic energy of the code had dissipated, leaving behind a wake of adrenaline and confusion. Dr. Albright stood in the center of the room, his gaze fixed on Aris. The other staff members hovered, pretending to check IV lines and chart, but their attention was riveted on the impossible confrontation. Aris, for her part, felt strangely calm. The storm was over, both in the room and inside her. She had stepped out of the shadows, and the world hadn't ended. She simply stood by the bed, her hand resting lightly on the rail, her eyes on the patient. She was already mentally calculating the next steps, monitoring for reperfusion injury, checking coagulation panels every 30 minutes, watching for signs of intracranial hemorrhage. The protocols were running in her head, as familiar as breathing. "Vance, is it?" Albright said, reading her name tag. His tone was cautious, probing. "Dr. Carter tells me you intervened." "The patient was in a CAPS event," Aris said simply, her voice flat, devoid of pride or defensiveness. "The standard ACLS protocol was contraindicated. I suggested an alternative." Albright's eyebrows shot up. The casual, expert use of acronyms, the clinical detachment. It was jarring, coming from a woman holding a dirty rag she'd unconsciously picked up from her cart. "You suggested an alternative, and you diagnosed catastrophic antiphospholipid syndrome during a code, a diagnosis most of my attendings would miss with a week to prepare." The levodo reticularis, combined with the precipitous drop in pressure and refractory hypoxia, was indicative, Aris stated, as if reciting from a textbook. "It's a rare presentation, but a classic one." Ben Carter finally spoke, his voice full of a shame that was almost painful to witness. "She's not a janitor. Sir, that's Dr. Aris Thorne." The name landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Albright's jaw literally dropped. The older nurse, Maria, who had been quietly supporting Eris, gasped. Eris Thorne. It wasn't a common name, but in the world of academic medicine, it was legendary. The prodigy surgeon from Hopkins, the innovator, the one who had published that landmark paper on aortic dissections, the one who had vanished. Albright stared at her, his eyes wide with dawning recognition. He was older, from a different specialty, but he'd been to conferences where she had been the keynote speaker. He was seeing her now, not the gray uniform, but the bone structure, the intelligent eyes, the unmistakable aura of command that she had tried so hard to suppress. "My God," Albright whispered. "It is you. I heard you'd retired. Left medicine." "I did," Eris said quietly. She felt a flush of heat rise in her neck. This was it, the unraveling. "You left medicine to become a janitor? At a regional hospital in the middle of nowhere?" Albright's voice was a cocktail of disbelief and something else. Accusation, as if her choice were a personal affront to the entire profession. "I had my reasons," Eris said, her voice firming, a hint of a boundary in her tone. "Reasons that are my own." Her walkie-talkie crackled again. Sal, her supervisor. "Vance, where are you? I need the biohazard spill on the second floor cleaned up. Now." The mundane order was so absurd in the context of the moment that it was almost funny. Eris reached to her hip to respond, but Albright held up a hand, stopping her. "I think," he said slowly, his mind clearly working, "that we can find someone else to handle that. Why don't you come with me to my office, Dr. Thorne?" He said her name deliberately, testing it out. "We have a great deal to discuss." She hesitated, her gaze going back to Chloe. "Her PTT and anti-XA levels need to be monitored closely. She's at high risk for a bleed now." Ben Carter stepped forward. "I'll handle it," he said. He looked directly at Eris, his eyes filled with a humbling mix of gratitude and awe. "I won't let you down, I promise." Eris gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, a passing of the torch for now. She turned and followed Dr. Albright out of the ICU, leaving behind a room full of people staring after her as if she were an apparition. Walking down the hallway, she was acutely aware of the stairs. The whispers had already started. The janitor, Dr. Thorne. The story was spreading through the hospital's nervous system at the speed of gossip. Her anonymity, the shield she had held up for 4 years, had been vaporized in the space of 10 minutes. Albright's office was on the top floor, large and quiet, with a sprawling view of the city now washed clean by the rain. He closed the door and motioned for her to sit, not in the guest chair, but in one of the leather armchairs by the window. He didn't sit behind his desk, but took the chair opposite her, creating an atmosphere of conversation, not interrogation. "I'm not going to ask you why, Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice gentle. "I can see that it's a painful subject. A person of your caliber doesn't make a choice like that lightly. What I am going to say is thank you. You saved that young woman's life. You did it by breaking protocol, by challenging and attending, and by risking, well, whatever it is you've built here. You acted as a doctor when you had every reason not to." Eris said nothing, just stared out the window at the breaking dawn. The sky was a bruised purple and soft gray. "The thing is," Albright continued, leaning forward, "this hospital has a problem. We're a good regional center, but we're not a top-tier academic institution. We get complex cases, and sometimes my people are out of their depth. What happened tonight with Dr. Carter? He's a good doctor, but he's young, and he saw a pattern he was trained to see. You saw the one he wasn't. That kind of insight, It's not something you can teach from a textbook. It's earned. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I can't imagine you want to go back to the OR, and I won't ask you to. But what you did tonight, that was a different kind of surgery. You diagnosed a flaw in the system and corrected it. I need that. This hospital needs that. Before Aris could process this, Albright's desk phone rang. He excused himself and answered it. His end of the conversation was short, his face growing more serious with each passing second. When? And what's his pressure? Okay, I'm on my way. He hung up. There's a patient in the ER, a 45-year-old man, a transfer from a rural clinic. He was in a minor car accident 2 days ago, seemed fine. Now he's presenting with abdominal pain and confusion. His pressure is dropping, and nobody can figure out why. The scans are clean. It was a test. She knew it instantly. The first time could have been a fluke, a lucky guess, a hyper-specific piece of knowledge from her past. But this was a new problem, a diagnostic puzzle. Albright stood up. He looked at her, his expression an open question. I know I have no right to ask this of you. You're not on staff. You're not even technically a licensed physician in this state anymore, I'd wager. Aris's credentials had lapsed 2 years ago. She was, in the eyes of the law, no more qualified to practice medicine than Sal, her janitorial supervisor. But I saw what you did down there, Albright said. I'm going to the ER. I'd consider it a personal favor if you would walk with me. He wasn't commanding her. He was inviting her. He was acknowledging her expertise while respecting her fragile status. It was a masterful move. She thought of Maya, asleep in her bed. She thought of her promise to be home. But she also thought of the feeling that had surged through her in that ICU bay, a feeling of competence, of purpose, of rightness, that she hadn't felt in 4 years. It was a terrifying, exhilarating drug. She stood up. The gray uniform felt absurdly out of place in this plush office, under the weight of this new expectation, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she was standing tall. Let's go see your patient, said Dr. Aris Thorne. The ER was a different kind of chaos from the ICU. Brighter, louder, more frantic. Albright led her past the curtained bays to Trauma 1, where the new patient lay. A man, pale and sweating, moaning softly. A young ER resident was trying to get another IV line in, his movements flustered. What do we have? Albright asked, his voice instantly commanding the room. John Miller, 45, the resident rattled off. Transferred from Oak Haven Clinic, MVC 2 days ago, blunt abdominal trauma, but the FAST scan was negative, CT abdomen was clean. Discharged. Came back in this morning with 10 out of 10 pain, confusion. BP is 75/40, heart rate 130. We're pouring in fluids, but he's not responding. Aris stood at the foot of the bed, her eyes scanning. She didn't look at the monitors first this time. She looked at the patient. She saw the sweat on his brow, the pallor of his skin. But she also saw something else. A small, fading bruise on his left flank. Gray Turner's sign. It was subtle, easily missed. Her eyes moved to his abdomen. It was distended, tight as a drum. Did the CT have contrast? She asked quietly. The resident looked at her, then at Albright, confused by her presence. Albright just nodded for him to answer. No. His creatinine was a little high, so we held off. Aris walked to the patient's side. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I'm a doctor. I need to press on your stomach. It's going to hurt, but I need you to bear with me. She placed her hands on his abdomen. Her touch was sure, practiced. She palpated gently, her fingers reading the landscape of his body. He cried out when she pressed on the left side. It was rigid, guarded. "He's bleeding," she said, straightening up. "The CT missed it." "How?" the resident challenged. "The scan was clean, no free fluid." "Because it's not free fluid," Eris explained, her voice taking on a didactic tone she hadn't used in years. "He has a slow retroperitoneal bleed, probably from a small tear in the splenic artery, likely a complication from the seatbelt injury. It's not bleeding into the abdominal cavity, it's bleeding behind it. The original scan missed it because it was too slow, and you didn't use contrast. Now, the hematoma is large enough that it's causing a mass effect. That's why his pressure is dropping, and why he's in so much pain." She pointed to the bruise on his flank. "Gray-Turner's sign. It's a late indicator of retroperitoneal hemorrhage. He's probably been bleeding for 48 hours. Albright and the resident stared at the bruise, then back at her. It was all there, in plain sight, but they hadn't assembled the pieces. "You need to get him to an IR suite right now for an embolization, or to the OR for an emergency splenectomy," Eris said, turning to Albright. "He doesn't have much time." Albright didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed a phone. "Get me Dr. Chen in interventional radiology. Tell him I have an emergent splenic artery bleed and I'm bringing the patient up now, and get general surgery down here." He looked at Eris, his face a mixture of wonder and profound relief. "Twice in one night. It wasn't luck." "It's pattern recognition," Eris corrected him softly. "That's all diagnosis is." She had done it again, proven her worth. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't a desperate act in the middle of a code. It was a calm, clinical assessment. It was who she was. The knowledge was a part of her, as essential as the blood in her veins. Hiding from it was like trying to hide from her own reflection. She had spent 4 years trying to be someone else, only to discover that Dr. Eris Thorne was still there, waiting. As they wheeled the patient out, Albright turned to her in the now quiet trauma bay. "I'm not letting you go back to a mop and bucket," he said, his voice resolute. "That's not a request. It's a statement of fact. We will create a role for you, a consultant, a diagnostician, a teacher. Whatever you want. We'll work around your schedule. We'll get your license reinstated. We will move mountains. But you cannot hide that mind from the world. It's a crime." The offer hung in the air. A path back. Not to the life she'd lost. She could never be a surgeon again, and she didn't want to be. But a path to a new life, one that integrated the person she had been with, the person she had become. It was everything she should have wanted, and it terrified her to her very soul, because all she could think about was Maya, and the promise she had made to a dying man. Really there. How could she be a mother and a doctor? She had failed at that balancing act once before, with devastating consequences. What made her think she could succeed now? If this story is proving that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about acting anyway, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because Eris didn't stay invisible. They chose to be seen, and that choice is about to matter more than anyone expected. She drove home in the pre-dawn light, the city still quiet and asleep. Her small 10-year-old sedan felt like a foreign vessel. Her hands on the steering wheel looked unfamiliar. They were the hands that had palpated an abdomen, that had pointed out a fatal error, that had gestured with an authority she thought was long dead. She was still wearing the gray uniform, but it felt like a costume now, a shell she had just shed. Her apartment was on the second floor of a modest, clean brick building in a quiet neighborhood of tree-lined streets. It was a world away from the sprawling empty house she had sold in Baltimore. This place was small, contained, manageable, safe. As she turned the key in the lock, she felt a wave of anxiety. She was walking back into the life she had fought to protect, but she was no longer the same person who had left it 8 hours before. She pushed the door open. The apartment was silent. A small nightlight cast a warm glow in the hallway, illuminating a trail of crayon drawings taped to the wall. Maya's artwork. They were mostly of two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a smiling sun. Her heart ached. She slipped off her shoes and walked to Maya's room. The door was slightly ajar. She peered inside. Maya was asleep, curled on her side, her face peaceful. Her cello, a 3/4 size instrument, stood in the corner of the room, a silent, wooden guardian. Liam had been so excited to teach her. Now, Maya's teacher was a kind but uninspired woman at the local music school. Another compromise. Another piece of Liam that was fading. Aris stood there for a long time, just watching her daughter breathe. This was why she had done it all. This peaceful, sleeping child. Albright's offer echoed in her head. "We will create a role for you. We'll work around your schedule." It sounded so reasonable, so perfect. But she knew the reality of that world. The calls in the middle of dinner. The quick consults that turned into hours. The mental space that a difficult case occupied, crowding out everything else. Medicine wasn't a job. It was a jealous lover. It demanded everything. She had given it everything once, and she had the scars to prove it. She retreated to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea, her movements stiff and automatic. She sat at the small table, the same table where she helped Maya with her homework. A photo was propped against the salt shaker. It was the last picture of the three of them, taken at a park a month before Liam got sick. He had Maya on his shoulders, his head thrown back in laughter. Aris stood beside them, smiling, but her eyes were distant. She remembered that day. She'd been on call. Her phone had buzzed 3 times during the hour they were there. She looked happy in the photo, but she remembered the tension, the feeling of being pulled in 2 directions at once. Could she do it again? Could she risk Maya feeling like the second priority? The janitor job, for all its indignities, had one supreme virtue. When she clocked out, she was done. Her mind was free. She could be completely present for Maya. That presence was the most valuable thing she had to give, the fulfillment of her promise to Liam. She must have dozed off, her head resting on her arms at the table, because the next thing she knew, a small hand was on her shoulder. "Mom, you're home." Aris's head snapped up. Maya stood there in her pajamas, her dark hair a mess, her eyes full of sleep and concern. The morning light was filtering through the kitchen window. "Hey, sweet pea," Aris said, her voice thick. "I didn't mean to fall asleep here." "You look different," Maya said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. A child's simple, devastating honesty. "Different how?" Maya tilted her head, studying her. "Your eyes. They're loud." Loud. What a strange, perfect word. Aris felt a lump form in her throat. "A lot happened at work last night, honey." "A bad thing?" Maya asked, her face clouding with worry. "No," Aris said slowly. "And yes, it was complicated." She looked at her daughter, at this small person who was the center of her universe, and decided on the truth, or a version of it she could understand. "You know how Mommy used to be a doctor?" Maya nodded. They didn't talk about it much. It was part of the hazy, sad before time. "Well, last night at the hospital, some people were very sick, and the other doctors, they needed some help, and I helped them." Maya's eyes widened. "Like a superhero?" Aris let out a short, surprised laugh. "Something like that, I guess. Did you fix them?" "We did," Aris said. "Yes, we fixed them." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing this. She climbed into the chair next to Aris. "Does this mean you're going to be a doctor again?" There it was. the question that had been circling in her own mind like a shark. She looked at Maya, ready to see fear or disappointment, ready to reassure her that nothing would change. "Would that be okay with you if I did?" Eris asked softly, bracing herself. Maya shrugged, a small, 9-year-old gesture that held a universe of meaning. "Is it what you're supposed to do?" "What do you mean, Sweet Pea?" "Mrs. Gable says everyone has a thing they're supposed to do. Like Dad's thing was music. And my thing is maybe the cello. She says it's what makes your heart feel full." Maya looked at her, her gaze unnervingly direct. "Does being a janitor make your heart feel full?" The question, so simple, so innocent, shattered Eris's carefully constructed defenses. No, it didn't. It made her feel safe. It made her feel anonymous. But it left her heart empty. She had been living a half-life, thinking it was for Maya, but what was she teaching her daughter? That when life hurts you, you hide? That you bury the best parts of yourself out of fear? Liam wouldn't have wanted that for her. He wouldn't have wanted it for Maya. "No, baby," Eris whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It doesn't." "But being a doctor does," Maya pressed. Eris thought of the feeling in the ICU, the absolute clarity, the sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the knowledge. It was about using it. It was about connecting the pieces, seeing the whole picture, and making a difference. It was the thing she was supposed to do. "Yes," Eris said, the admission a profound release. "It does." Maya smiled, a small, bright, uncomplicated thing. "Then you should do it. But," she added, her expression turning serious as she held up a finger, "you still have to make pancakes on Saturdays, and come to my concert. The doctor part can't forget the mom part." Tears welled in Eris's eyes. It was that simple. It wasn't a choice between being a doctor and being a mother. It was a negotiation, a balance. The doctor part can't forget the mom part. Liam had asked her to be really there. He hadn't asked her to cease to exist. In her grief, she had conflated the two. She had thought that to be a present mother, she had to erase the doctor. But Maya was showing her that she needed to see both. She needed a whole mother, not a fractured one. "I promise," Eris said, and this time, the promise felt different. It wasn't a promise to hide, but a promise to be present in her wholeness. "I will never forget the mom part. Pancakes, concerts, all of it." She pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, burying her face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. She felt a sense of clarity that was as sharp and cleansing as the one she'd felt in the ER. She knew what she had to do. Later that day, she called Dr. Albright. "I'll take the job," she said, her voice steady. "But I have terms." The transformation began not with a bang, but with paperwork. Lawyers from the hospital worked with the state medical board to expedite the reinstatement of her license. There were meetings, evaluations, and a mountain of forms. Eris handled it all with a detached efficiency. The most significant negotiation was over her role. She was adamant. No surgery, no on-call hours in the traditional sense. She would not be a slave to a pager again. They created a new position for her, one that hadn't existed before, Director of Diagnostic Medicine. She was, in essence, an in-house medical detective. She would lead morning grand rounds, consult on the hospital's most complex cases, and, most importantly to her, develop and run a new training program for residents focused on differential diagnosis and pattern recognition. Her hours were fixed, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., Monday to Friday. When she left the hospital, she was done. It was a revolutionary concept in a world that glorified 80-hour work weeks. The first day she walked into the hospital wearing not a gray uniform, but tailored slacks and a crisp white coat, with her new ID badge, Dr. Eris Thorne, diagnostic medicine. The whispers followed her like a wave. Some staff looked at her with awe, others with suspicion. But the change was most palpable in the residents. Her first session with them was in a conference room. Ben Carter was there, sitting in the front row, his posture humbled, his notebook open. He looked like a different man from the arrogant attending in the ICU. Aris didn't start with a PowerPoint or a lecture. She put up a single slide with the details of Chloe's case. "Let's talk about cognitive bias," she began, her voice calm and measured. Specifically, anchoring bias. Dr. Carter and his team saw a young person with a fever and a cough, and they anchored on the most likely diagnosis, a viral infection. Every subsequent piece of data was filtered through that initial assumption. They weren't wrong. They were just not entirely right. My job, and soon to be your job, is to always ask one question: what else could this be? Over the next few months, she transformed the way the hospital thought. She taught them to look at the whole patient, not just the numbers on a monitor. She taught them to listen to the story the symptoms were telling. She created the Vance Protocol, named after the alias she had chosen for her quiet years, a nod to the life that had taught her a different kind of wisdom, a rapid response consult for any patient not responding to standard treatment. She was a teacher, a mentor, a safety net. Her days were filled with intellectual challenge and purpose. And at 4 p.m., she walked out the door and went home to Maya. She kept her promises. She made pancakes on Saturdays. They were often lopsided, but Maya didn't care. She attended the winter concert, sitting in the front row of the school auditorium. She watched Maya, small and serious, draw the bow across the strings of her cello, producing a clear, beautiful note. In that sound, Aris heard Liam's legacy and Maya's future, and for the first time, she felt her own past and present harmonize. One afternoon, a young woman with a bright scarf tied around her head walked hesitantly into her office. It was Chloe. Her hair was still growing back from the chemotherapy she'd needed to reset her immune system, but her eyes were bright and full of life. "Dr. Thorne?" she said, her voice a little shy. "I hope this is okay. I wanted to thank you." Aris stood up and came around her desk. "Chloe, it's so good to see you looking so well." "My doctors told me what happened," Chloe said, her voice thick with emotion. "They told me I was gone, and that you, the cleaning lady, brought me back." She laughed, a watery sound. "It's the best story I've ever heard. I'm a literature major. I know a good story." She handed Aris a small, wrapped book. "It's my favorite. I just wanted you to have it." Aris unwrapped it. It was a collection of poems by Mary Oliver. She opened it, and on the inside cover, Chloe had written, "For the woman who saw me, thank you for my life." Aris looked up, her vision blurring. "Thank you, Chloe. This means more than you know." After Chloe left, Aris sat with the book in her hands. She thought about the janitor's closet, the overturned bucket, the feeling of being invisible. She had thought hiding was a form of protection, but she realized now it was just another kind of death. Being seen, truly seen, was terrifying, but it was also the only way to truly live. The hospital was changing. Ben Carter was becoming an exceptional and much more humble physician. The Vance Protocol had already been credited with saving 3 other lives by catching complex diagnoses early. Her individual action had created a systemic change. The ripple effects of her one terrifying choice were spreading in ways she could never have imagined. If this story reminded you that hiding isn't the same as healing, and that being truly seen is worth the risk, subscribe, share, and comment below. Because somewhere right now, someone is hiding gifts the world needs. Maybe this story will remind them to step forward. 2 years passed. The rain was falling again. but this time it was a gentle spring shower, washing the city clean and making the green of the new leaves outside the window seem impossibly vibrant. Aris stood in her kitchen, not the small, cramped one from the apartment, but a larger one, filled with light, in a modest house with a backyard they had bought 6 months ago. The air smelled of garlic and roasting chicken. Music was playing, a rich, sonorous cello piece by Bach. It wasn't a recording. In the living room, Maya, now a whip-smart 11-year-old with her father's eyes and her mother's focus, was practicing. The notes she played were no longer hesitant or simple. They were complex, confident, and full of emotion. Her new teacher, a retired symphony cellist Aris had found, said she had a rare gift. Aris smiled, stirring a sauce on the stove. Her life had found a new rhythm, one that was busy and full, but not frantic. Her work at the hospital was deeply fulfilling. The diagnostic grand rounds she led were the most popular teaching sessions at the hospital. Ben Carter was now the chief resident and her right-hand man, a testament to his capacity for growth. They had lunch once a week, a friendship forged in the crucible of that one chaotic night. Chloe was back in college, healthy, and sent her a postcard every few months from her study abroad program in Italy. The hospital's mortality rate for complex, undiagnosed cases had dropped by 18% in 2 years, a statistic Albright quoted at every board meeting. Her right hand was perfectly steady as she held the spoon. The tremor had vanished completely, not through therapy, but through purpose. It had been a symptom of a life out of balance, and the life she was living now was anything but. The doorbell rang. Aris wiped her hands and went to answer it. Mrs. Gable stood on the porch, holding a pie. She still came over for dinner once a week, a beloved fixture in their new life. "Smells wonderful in here, Aris," she said, bustling in. "You say that every time," Aris laughed. Later, as they sat around the dinner table, Maya was recounting a story from school. She was animated, funny, her face lit with the easy confidence of a child who feels utterly secure in her world. Aris watched her, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She had not broken her promise to Liam. She was here, really here, in a way she had never been before. She was present for the homework, the scraped knees, the friend drama, and the musical triumphs. After dinner, as Aris was tucking her into bed, Maya looked up from her book. "You know," she said casually, "I liked it when you were a janitor." Aris paused, surprised. "You did? Why?" "Because it was our secret," Maya said. "It was like you were a queen pretending to be a servant. I knew who you really were the whole time." Aris sat on the edge of the bed, stunned. A queen pretending to be a servant. She had seen herself as a ghost, a failure, a refugee from her own life. But her daughter had seen her as royalty in disguise. She had seen the strength, not the fear. "I think," Aris said, her voice soft, "I had to pretend for a while to remember how to be a queen." "You're not pretending anymore," Maya said with certainty. She closed her book and snuggled under the covers. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, my love." Aris walked to the window of her bedroom and looked out at the rain-slicked street. She thought of the woman in the gray uniform, hiding in the shadows of the ICU, terrified of her own knowledge. She thought of the promise she had made to a dying man and the promise she had made to herself. They had seemed to be in conflict, but they were not. The best way to honor the man who had loved music was to build a life filled with it. The best way to be a mother to her daughter was to show her what it meant to be whole. She was not just a mother. She was not just a doctor. She was not the ghost of a surgeon or a janitor hiding from her past. She was all of it. The grief for Liam was still there, a quiet, foundational note in the chord of her life, but it was now harmonized with purpose, love, and a hard-won peace. She was a woman who had lost everything, hidden from the world, and found her way back, not to the life she had before, but to a better, more authentic one. She was Dr. Aris Thorne, and she was home.